Okay, so I think we can start our panel. I'm thrilled to be moderating this panel on legal and policy pathways to just and sustainable energy transition. I have the privilege to introduce our great speakers. And we have two speakers online. Dr. Damiano Fuschi, I was told that you can connect at this moment and do the presentation as the first speaker, correct?
Hello everyone. Sorry to be online and not showing myself because I'm traveling to Rome right now.
Everything is under control. Okay.
Yeah. Can you listen to me?
All right. Dr. Erman Eroğlu, Ankara Social Sciences University. The other speaker here on our panel is Dr. Mirko Camanna, Erasmus University Rotterdam, Professor Łukasz Grzejdziak, University of Łódź and University of Strathclyde, and many others as well. And the last speaker is also online, Professor Fatih Bugra, Erdem, Ankara Social Sciences. So let's dive in the presentation. Dr. Damiano Fuschi, the floor is yours, however, online.
Okay, thank you. As I was saying before, I'm pleased not to be here today because I'm traveling to Rome since I've been appointed by my university to participate to a parliamentary commission about a reform about energy and environmental sustainability. And I can't even show the video because I do not have a great connection. By the way, I would like to thank all the organizers to give me again this opportunity to participate to this great conference. I will be a little bit quick today since the conditions are not the best for me, and of course I'll less more time to the other speakers. There are many good scholars today, and I will really enjoy to listen to them. Talking about my research, I will talk about science diplomacy because in the year I studied a lot of this topic with the other colleague of the University of Milan, and we won a European project called Soft Action, and we are working all together on this topic, and I would really like if you can join this network of scholars, and I will send all the references to join this project work, and it's very interesting. And we are organizing many good conferences all around Europe. By the way, the main problem that we are studying basically in the work group one of this project research is about the technological sovereignty related to the energy transition, because as you all know, owning a technological implementation, it means to have different relations with other states, and especially in Europe, we have a great exchange of resources, and also we rely on the production of energy by other states as it happens in Italy. So why I was talking about science diplomacy in my abstract? Because we have a mixing operating system of a just transition in Europe. And so also with this project and also with the work of each scholar, we are framing a new way maybe to implement in the European law an obligation to be more fair in the implementation and production of energy, because of course we have many problems. One related on the owning of the technological know-how, and it is very important because it's related to the cost of energy, and having different cost of energy around the European Union, it means to creating a kind of divide between people, and so it is against the principle of equality and the principle of course of equality inside the EU space and also inside the state, because in Italy we are facing a cost divide, we can call it a cost divide, also between the different regions of Italy, and so this is very a great problem, and it is of course unfair, but primarily against the law. And so we are studying, and I will explain in this paper how we can grant a fair access to those resources. And of course, transparency is one of the prerequisites to prevent the forms of energy injustice in this world where we can find a dynamic tracking and flexibility in the market. I will close this brief intervention, and then I will listen to you because the conditions are not very good here on the train. Talking about the crisis that we can still face in bad times that are not supposed to be only wars, but we can have bad times related to the scarcity of resources, or maybe to technological fail. We saw the problem we had in Spain, and it's related to a bad managing, we can say, of the energy that people were asking for. And so now we are implementing many tools driven by AI that can use different resources to put the energy in the energy network. Because if we have a huge infrastructure of renewable energy, as it can happen in the south of Europe with the use of new and clean way of producing energy that is related to wind or sun. If we have in some moment a great production related to that kind of energy, we will face after a while a failing in the energy network related to the traditional way to produce energy with petrol, oil, or you can say the traditional ways related to the carbon fossil fuels. And so what I would like to underline, that crisis governance requires pre-agreed protocols for blockout, equitable load shedding, liability parity, and rapid scientific advice to decision makers. And so what I would lastly underline, that we need, and we are working to produce this kind of framework, EU-level joint regulatory sandboxes, a shared foresight process for energy risks, and a framework agreement on energy data standards, because otherwise, of course, we have to consider then the data that we collect from the user and the data that we collect from infrastructure are very important in order to shape a fair energy sharing. By connecting law, economics, and diplomacy, of course, I will then describe, of course, and I will excuse again myself, I will show better in the article, the roadmap that I'm working on with the project I exposed before, and so the main goal of these 4 years, because the project will end in 2029, and I will really hope that you can join this project. Then I will share the information. But I listened to Dr. Mirko Camanna that is on board the project, and he will give you all the advice. We have to institutionalize science in policies and in the fair delivery and secure the efficient transition of energy across at least the European states. So sorry again for the audio that I think is not the best that I can have, but I'm very pleased to the organizer to give to me the opportunity to join you online, since I had a lot of problems in those days. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Fuschi. Hope next year we'll meet here in Katowice. And now we can be acquainted more with the role of green bonds within the framework of international investment law. Dr. Eroğlu.
Hello, everyone. Is it okay? Okay, can I get that one? Thank you. Dear guests, colleagues, and participants, good afternoon. I'm going to talk about the role of green bonds within the framework of international investment law. It's a pleasure to talk to you today about one of the most pressing issues of our time. I mean, green bonds. It means how to finance a just energy transition and the critical role that green bonds play in this transformation. For the introduction, the climate crisis is no longer just an environmental concern, because it's a reshaping our social, economic, and legal systems, and achieving a sustainable and fair transition to low carbon economies requires restructuring carbon-intensive sectors, implementing clean energy systems, and ensuring that no community is left behind. In this process, finance becomes a key enabler. Among the various climate finance instruments, green bonds have emerged as essential tools, challenging towards environmentally beneficial projects while also supporting economic development. For this one, I'm going to talk about Turkey's commitment and policy development. Turkey took a major step forward in 2021 by ratifying the Paris Agreement, becoming the 197th country to do so, and setting a net zero target for 2053. Following this, the Capital Markets Board of Turkey issued the guidelines on green bonds and sustainable debt instruments in 2022. It's a significant milestone in Turkey's green finance journey. These guidelines are aligned with the international capital market associations, in other words, ICMA's green bond principles, but it's around 4 core components. The components are use of proceeds, project evaluation and selection, and management of proceeds and reporting. However, the non-binding nature of these guidelines presents a challenge. Without enforceable rules and strong oversight, there is a growing risk of greenwashing projects that are labeled green but fail to deliver the genuine environmental benefits. And the EU, in this part, I want to talk about the EU's framework and its relevance to Turkey. And EU has taken the global lead in sustainable finance regulation through the EU taxonomy regulation and the EU green bond standards. These provide a unified system for classifying environmentally sustainable activities and set clear standards for green investments. So for Turkey, which is an EU candidate country and a major trading partner, alignment with these frameworks is not optional, but it's a strategic thing. Compliance will be essential, especially as the EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism starts impacting exporters in carbon-intensive sectors such as steel, cement, and electricity. Adopting EU standards will therefore enhance Turkey's access to European green capital market and build investor confidence. And globally, green bonds have been instrumental in financing renewable energy infrastructure, particularly solar, wind, and geothermal power. In Turkey, most green bond proceeds have supported projects in renewable energy efficiency, and other emission-reducing activities. A remarkable milestone came in 2023 when Turkey issued its first sovereign green bond worth $2.5 billion. It was more than 3 times oversubscribed, a clear sign of investor appetite for credible green finance from emerging markets. At the corporate level, Arçelik, one of the largest manufacturers of Turkey, issued the country's first corporate green bond worth $350 million. The proceeds fund projects ranging from clean energy installations to circular economy initiatives and energy efficient productions. I mean, this case shows that green bonds can both accelerate decarbonization and sustain industrial employment, ensuring a socially responsible transitions. And for the just transition part, but an energy transition is not only about clean technology, it's about justice. Communities depend on coal mining and fossil fuels must not be left behind. As Turkey gradually phases out coal, green finance mechanism can help find not only renewable projects, but also job retaining, local economies diversification, and energy access programs. A truly just transition ensures that workers, low-income households, and rural regions all benefits from the green economy. So green bonds can and should integrate these social dimensions into their design, marking sustainability, both environment and inclusive. For the conclusion, green bonds are more than financial instruments. They are strategic tools for shaping a just, resilient, and sustainable future. Turkey has made prominently initial process, but moving forward, legal enforceability, transparency, and social inclusion will be key to realizing their full potential. So, at the end, green bonds can be the financial bridge that takes us there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Eroğlu. And now we're switching to hydrogen investment and the EU external policy with a tricky question. Just transition or a green Trojan horse? Dr. Camanna, the floor is yours.
Okay, maybe. Do you hear me? Okay, great. I think I don't need it, but I'm a bit short, so. Okay, so first of all, thank you very much for all the organizing committee for inviting me and for the chair for this kind of introduction. And yeah, as you see from my title, today I will talk about the EU external policy on hydrogen investment with a tricky question if it's just transition or a green Trojan horse. And this may help you to understand and assess what is the goal and the topic that I want to explain today. So here the point is we are talking a lot about green investment. The EU is talking a lot about climate change and investment for green transition. But what about the impact of this investment, in particular for foreign investment, in particular for Global South? And now I want to explain a bit, very briefly, the three main key concepts for my paper, in particular for sustainable development. I mean for sustainable development, the traditional definition based on three pillars, the economic one, of course, but also the environmental and the social. So in that sense, when we think to sustainable development, we have to include all these three dimensions. And the second, just transition, concept that we have to say that in international law and in particular in international economic law is still a concept not very well developed. And in my paper, I mean for just transition, greening the economy fair and inclusive as possible to everyone concerned, creating decent work opportunities and leaving no one behind. And this is the main point of the concept of just transition. And of course, the third concept, I will not go too much in details because I imagine that you are most of all experts or at least know what is hydrogen, but I just want to underline a couple of aspects that are very important. First of all, for hydrogen, we have to assess and understand the importance for the green transition and for climate change of hydrogen because it's considered as so-called missing link to the energy transition. Because an adoption to a hydrogen economy could lead to 80 gigatons of CO abatement by 2050, that is equivalent to 20% of the total abatement needed in 2050. So we are talking about a very big percentage. Second, we have to contextualize a bit hydrogen, because usually the main uses for hydrogen are the so-called hard-to-abate sectors, like long-range transport, and is also used hydrogen for greening the agricultural and food industry, because, for example, we can use hydrogen to produce ammonia, which is a fundamental component for the agricultural field. And finally, just a final clarification, that hydrogen is an energy carrier, such as electricity, and is not an energy source, such as the sun or the wind. So we have to use energy to produce energy. And now, the other point is related to the specific color of hydrogen that I contextualized in my paper, because we know there is a sort of rainbow of hydrogens, and in my paper, and also for the EU level, the most important is green hydrogen. Why? Because green hydrogen is produced based on renewables. So we use the energy from renewables, we put this in the electrolyzers, in the electrolyzer we split the molecules of hydrogen and oxygen, and then we capture these hydrogen molecules and we use it for what I explained before. So in that sense, the green hydrogen industry, in theory, in the most efficient way, is completely CO2 neutral, because we don't produce CO2 to produce the electricity, we don't produce CO2 in the system, and then we have a completely clean energy. And that's why also the European Union is focusing mainly on green hydrogen. But then, this is usual, what I said before, the normal history and the normal language for hydrogen, but we have also to assess the other part, the dark side of the green hydrogen. Because as you see in this slide as well, also producing hydrogen has a lot of concern and can have a lot of problems, both from an environmental and a social perspective. And I mainly underlined 3 main issues. The first one is the upstream supply chain. What I mean all the supply chain necessary to produce hydrogen. So for example, to create the renewables or to create the electrolyzers that are necessary to produce the hydrogen. What is the problem here? That of course we need rare earth, we need a lot of minerals, and in that sense, we all know, and we also heard this morning about the main concern related to mining, to extract these rare earth and these minerals. So in that sense, the point is we have to pay attention when we think about hydrogen to not just put the environmental problem at the beginning of the source. So in producing the instruments to produce hydrogen, because we cannot say that the industry is truly clean if we just put the environmental problem at the bottom or at the end. And the second problem is the direct impact of production of green hydrogen. And in this perspective, the hydrogen is very requiring, I would say, industry, because we need a lot of land to produce hydrogen, and we need also a lot of water, because as I told you before, we need water to do the electrolysis. And we need clean water. And what is the problem here? The main 2 problems are, potential problems are land grabbing, so taking the lands from local communities or for other sources and use this land to produce hydrogen, and water grabbing, so taking the drinkable water from the local communities or for agricultural fields, and in that sense use this water to produce hydrogen. And this, of course, could create a serious competition over natural resources between the local communities on the one hand and the investors on the others. And finally, the outcomes on the market, because hydrogen industry, in particular in Global South, is mainly export-oriented. So we produce the hydrogen in Global South, and then we bring the hydrogen to the Global North for our climate goals. So these are the 2 sides of the hydrogen. On the one hand, very green, very clean, very useful, in particular for strategic sectors. But on the others, we have also this dark side of green hydrogen. Now, what is the EU legal framework regarding hydrogen? In that sense, European Union, as we know, is investing a lot of money and a lot of effort on hydrogen, and in particular for green hydrogen, mainly for 4 reasons. First, because according also to the Climate Neutrality Act, REPower, and similar, hydrogen is considered fundamental to meet our climate goals by 2050 and to become a continent climate neutral. The second point, and this is more related to the relevance of foreign investment in green hydrogen, is that according to the recent studies, EU is has an insufficient production of green hydrogen. So we need to import hydrogen from non-EU countries to complete the green transition and to meet our climate goals. That's why it's so important to think also about the external dimension. The third point is an economic reason, because producing green hydrogen in Global South is much cheaper. Why? Because the costs are reduced, the legislation usually is a bit more flexible, and in general they have more space, and in that sense you have to think, we need land. In Europe we have a problem of free lands in the Global South. I think, for example, in Africa or in South America, they have more space for this. And of course, another economic reason related is the fact that the top investors, in particular in Africa for renewables, are from European Union and from US. So the interest of European Union is also to protect and to incentivize its companies. And finally, the last reason is the geopolicy and the so-called hydrogen diplomacy. So the European Union has a goal to be a global key player in hydrogen, and in that sense want to fix the global standards and control the supply chain, because of course it's considered a strategic resource. And how they do that? They do mainly with 2 kinds of instruments. General tools, so tools created not specifically for hydrogen, but can be used also for hydrogen sectors, and I mean in particular the trade agreements to control in particular the supply chain and to control the standard for trading, and second, the investment agreements. I mean, in particular, the bilateral investment agreements and the multilateral investment agreements. And as we know from the Lisbon Treaty, now the European Union is starting concluding international investment agreements that on the one hand are considered very green, but then on the other, if we look concretely in the details, I spoiler a bit what I will mention before, is questionable if are really green or not. And then European Union also adopted specific legal tools specifically for hydrogen and in particular for green hydrogen. On the one hand, we have financial and technical instruments to support the creation of hydrogen investments in Global South, and on the other hand, legal and political instruments to reinforce the relations between the European Union and states, in particular the Memorandum of Understanding, for example, the one with Namibia that is related to rare earth material and green hydrogen, or the Green Partnership with Morocco and Mauritania and Chile that are the main economies probably for producing green hydrogen in future. So you see, European Union has a very big toolbox of instruments. But now, what is the assessment of this legal framework? So what is the goal and what is the concrete meaning? Because if you read these instruments in the European Union words, seems very positive, very climate change oriented, also just transition, giving work, giving job to the Global South, and also facilitating our transition. But there are also important concerns, and identified in particular 3 main concerns. The first one that was also mentioned this morning is related to the limited role of concepts like sustainable development and just transition in European framework. In the sense that if you read the memorandum, if you read the specific instruments on hydrogen, it's not very common to find words like sustainable or related in particular to the social dimension. The environmental dimension is, of course, at the center, but a lot of times the social dimension, this just transition, is left aside. Or, and this is related also to the more general framework of the investment agreements, you have mentioned to environment and to the social dimension, but these instruments are not truly effective. Okay, you have this principle, we need to adopt just transition, but then you don't have instruments to concretely realize that, or to enforce that in case one society concludes an agreement and then doesn't respect, for example, impact assessment or free, prior, and informed consent. So even if you have the instruments, usually are not very strong weapons. The second is that the lack of control of the hydrogen value chain in the actual EU legal frameworks. Yeah, of course, we have instruments, we have legislation to control and also to assess the kind of investment that we do abroad, but a lot of times there are serious concerns. Think, for example, to the European Investment Bank. In that sense, there are several research that underline that in not all the 100% of cases, all the efforts and all the duties to the companies related to environmental impact assessment or in general to environmental and social issues are respected. And finally, financial disputable investment, and this is connected to the second concern. So in that sense, it's not always very precise, the control on these kind of investments. And I give you a concrete example in that sense, the Hypen project in Namibia. This is a very recent case. Hypen is an international company that is financed also by German companies and is considered one of the main and most important projects for green hydrogen in Namibia. In the project, they will occupy a very large space for 4,000 kilometers area to produce green hydrogen. But what is the problem? The goal is to do that in the ancestral land of the Nama people, so indigenous communities in Namibia. And some NGO did specific analysis on that project and found that, for example, the Nama people were not involved in this project, so was not required or was not obtained the environmental impact assessment in a proper way, and the free, prior, informed consent that I remember for the non-lawyers is customary law, so everyone is obliged to respect it. And then also specific research found probably serious danger for biodiversity and limited job opportunities in this field. Why this is important also for an EU perspective? Well, first of all, because is a company financed also by European money from the member states. Second, because European Union give technical support to this project. And third, and this is a bit uncertain, and this, I think, open a floor to another kind of discussion, because if you look at the Hypen website, they say that in 2022, they concluded a letter of intent of like 35 million euros with European Investment Bank. But when I looked at the site of the European Investment Bank, I didn't find anything. So I'm not sure if European Investment Bank concretely financed or not this project. But in general, I think that this project is very important to demonstrate that also a green hydrogen industry in practice could create serious concern. Now, very quick to the potential solutions. I don't have specific answer for now as well. I just give you some general food for thought for potential discussion. And of course, I think that the main problem is reinforcing international agreements provision related to sustainable development goals. As I told you before, investment agreements are not so strong in that sense. The second is a true effective control on the project finance at the EU level to verify that they're really concretely sustainable. And finally, continue what are we currently doing, for example, with CS3D and similar regulation to enforce the SDGs provision in the European continent. And here I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Camanna. And we are moving to China, and Professor Grzejdziak will give us a lesson on industrial policy for electromobility especially including EU state aid rules?
So, fantastic. Okay, I think it works. So good afternoon, everyone. Today I will have a pleasure to speak a little bit about Chinese industrial policy in electromobility sector and try to demystify the processes that are going there. But first, let me thank our hosts for having me here. This is my utmost pleasure to visit once again Katowice. It's my third time at this conference. Thank you, Ms. Chairman. Apparently, this is probably the first international conference when my last name was properly pronounced. So it's something that really pleased me. Well, long story short, I will talk today about the lessons that EU industrial policy and state aid rules can take from the Chinese industrial policy in the area of electromobility. We all observe the, let's say, external effects of this policy. We can observe Chinese cars pretty much everywhere in Europe. We can observe growing industry. But we do not know how this happened and how it's going. But of course, electromobility and industrial policy in sector of electromobility is rather a pretext or maybe an opportunity for me to talk a little bit about the future directions of the European state aid law and European industrial policy. Because as we all observe, we now live in times of economic changes, the times in which superpowers, global superpowers, strain their muscles. We observe trade wars. We observe aggressive industrial policy. Chinese policy here in this sector is one of the examples. The question is now, what should the EU do with this one? Should we respond aggressively as well? Should we have a similar industrial policy in certain sectors? And the answer to this question could be quite easy, but in the European Union, we have a genuinely European invention which is called state aid rules. And they are limiting our freedom to subsidize economy. But there were good reasons to have state aid rules. And the question is, should we re-liberalize them? Tough word. Or should we rather stay with the principles we have? So, to answer this question, I will first, I will first discuss industrial policy and its relation to state aid rules. Then I will try to refer to the example of Chinese industry and try to draw certain lessons from it. So first, well, I will start from the anecdote I heard from the first president of the Polish Competition Authority, Professor Anna Fornalczyk. She once told me the story when she was leaving her office. It was in the first half of the 1990s, and she had a farewell meeting with a new prime minister of Poland, Waldemar Pawlak, at the time. And she just reported that they were working on some kind of a new act, new project, new bills, including the Polish Act on State Aid, which was at the time realization of our obligations under the Act of Association with the European Union. And when Prime Minister Pawlak heard about this project, he said, wonderful. Finally, we will have opportunity to transfer giant money to companies. No, 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 absolutely not. State aid is on the contrary. State aid imposes limits. So, of course, let's put aside the ignorance of the former Polish Prime Minister, but this misunderstanding, it perfectly illustrates the tensions or the different perspectives of state aid or subsidizing economy from the point of view of national authorities and the European Union. Well, first, from the point of view of national authorities, state aid is yet another tool of industrial policy. Subsidizing economy is a very effective and very popular tool because we are giving something. It's rather a carrot type of approach, not a stick type of approach. So we are giving some subsidies here. But from the point of view of the European Union, it's something different. Why can't subsidies and in general industrial policy can't be seen in the EU in the same way as in member states? There are three reasons. First, well, the EU is a sui generis but still international organization. So we have different member states. Second, every subsidized project must be somewhere located. So not in the European Union in abstractive way, but in certain member state. And the third one, somebody has to pay for it. And usually national money are used here. So now we have this internal market perspective. State aid rules were invented in Treaty of Paris to maintain level playing field between member states, to avoid a subsidy war between member states, to facilitate the creation of the internal market. And from the very beginning, the concept of state aid was based on ordoliberal premises. Here we have one of the creators of ordoliberalism and social market economy, Alfred Miller-Armack. And this concept is focused on the idea that in the very center of the economy shall be placed a free market with economic freedom. And intervention, public intervention, must be considered only as an exemption, driven by certain considerations, including most of all the market failure. So once market failure is identified, the European member state may finance certain actions that are targeted to at least decrease the effects of this market failure. So it must be market failure oriented. And second, when state aid is given, it is subject to two very important principles. First, proportionality. It must be no more than that it is needed to address this market failure. Second, it must be effective in targeted market failure. So if we look at the EU state aid policy, this is a quotation from a kind of an old document from 2005 State Aid Action Plan, but it's still valid, more or less, in which the EU Commission explained that state aid may be declared compatible with the treaty provided it fulfills clearly defined objectives of common interest, usually correcting market failures, improving the functioning of markets and enhancing European competitiveness. They can also help promote certain other goals, but in general, the logic behind this is that free market is organizing certain processes. When there is a market failure, there is a rationale for public intervention, but it must be proportional and it must be, of course, effective. Fine. So now let us go back from 2005 to 2025. Now we are living in a different reality. We are living in times of first time of crisis. We suffered a couple of crises. Starting in 2008, we had the financial crisis, 2007, 2008. Then we had, of course, COVID. We had Russian aggression in Ukraine and certain disturbances in the global economy. So the European Union started, in fact, already to liberalize certain rules. So the European Union didn't stay indifferent to these challenges. So in this slide, we can observe certain elements of this new policy in the area of state aid, which is based on some kind of liberalization of rules targeted especially to certain technologies. We have, for instance, CHIPS Act for Europe. We have, of course, the EU Green Deal and the rest of the measures supporting the just transition we are talking about here. We have certain other policy documents of the European Union liberalizing state aid rules. But apparently, and there is a discussion in scholarship, whether we observe a paradigm shift here in the area of state aid. And in fact, I don't think so. It's still rather a mild liberalization, going from a concept of maybe market failure to a concept of systemic failure of the economy, which is quite similar, but giving the European Commission much more discretion in directing state aid and to create certain policy initiatives. But still, the EU is upholding the core principles of market regulations. And now the question is, should we go further? Should we just start a subsidy race with China in the area, let's say, of electromobility? Do state aid rules, in fact, weaken our European Union in global competition? Well, China does not care about state aid. The US do not care about state aid. So the question is, should we go further? And let us now refer to the core, to Chinese policy in the area of automotive industry. We see the external, as I previously said, external effects of this policy. And the external effects are that they produced 30 million units of cars, mostly electric vehicles, in 2023. Probably this year it will be 35. 9 million units a year will be exported by 2030. Of course, not only electric vehicles, we are talking also about conventional, traditional cars, but mostly electric vehicles. 60% of all global electric vehicle sales are Chinese cars. We have now probably 55 million of units of production capacity in China. Just to give you just to imagine the scale, in the European Union, we sell a year like 16 million cars. In the US, it's 18, roughly. So they have a capacity to produce all the cars we need in these two big economies and much, much more. So how this happened? What are the sources of the Chinese success? So first, definitely lower labor costs, but as we compare now the situation in China and, well, let's say, Morocco, where the European cars are produced, not a big difference, I believe. The question of dominance in battery raw materials, which is very important here. In fact, China controls over 60% of global raw material processing for batteries and more than 80% of global battery cell manufacturing. And this is serious, in fact, source of this dominance. Access to other inexpensive raw materials, giant production capacities, advanced technologies, platformization strategies, and of course, industrial policy, which is based on massive subsidies. So how this happened? They started to build the capacity in the 80s, but it was growing through the years. The pivotal point was probably in 2007 when one gang, a gentleman who was previously a head of Volkswagen China, became a minister of industry, Chinese minister of industry, and, of science and technology, as it is written here, and he started to push forward the idea that, in fact, in traditional cars market, China probably has no chance in rivalization with established producers. But there is a gap in the market, electric vehicles, and they started to invest money. And in 2017, there was a medium and long-term development plan for the automotive industry, which imposed a target of 35 million cars to be produced by 2025 a year annually. And here in Poland, we understand how it worked. If the Communist Party established a target of 35 million, it meant that local party bonzos, local party officials, started to implement the plan. Every provincial governor wanted to have a factory, because you don't want to stay for whole your life and do your career in a province. You want to go to Beijing. And that is why they started to subsidize factories in China, in local factories. Totally uncoordinated situation. They were based on the concept of volume before profit. Profits were not important. The target that party established was important. So paradoxically, we had competition between local governments. They were investing giant money, and these factories were just, and the subsidies were enormous. In general, we have here forms of subsidies. Maybe forms are not so important, but the two things are important. They were all connected with the concept of volume. So they were conditional upon a certain target to be obtained. That is why volume was here important. And second, value is important. It was roughly between, it's just very hard to say because we do not have data, but it's between 28 to 50 billion US dollars per year that were invested in this industry. But there are certain, we rarely consider that the other side of this equation, the costs, or maybe the relation between costs and benefits, the effectiveness. So in other words, how much did they get back from their investment? So now we are only beginning to see the medium and long-term consequences of this policy. We, of course, observe the threat to the position of European and US and Japanese and Korean car makers, but we do not, we just started to analyze the negative sides. So first, poor coordination or almost no coordination of this industrial policy. So China's automotive policy suffers from a lack of coordination. Central governmental policy is there, but local policies are applied independently of themselves. So this makes, this is often uncoordinated and rather competitive than complementary. So this creates inefficiencies, giant inefficiencies. Many activities are just duplicated, redundant. Second, there is a tolerance for inefficient business models, so volume before profit. Now, local authorities are eager even to protect local actors, local factories, because they will never be probably profitable. But at the same time, it will be a shame for local governors to have a failure. That is why they are still subsidized, no matter what will be the profit of the factory. So then short production life cycles, because it's profit, it's volume before profit, and that there are targets based on volume. There are very short production life cycles. Usually in Europe, it's in the market, it's 6-8 years for a model, for a car model. In China, it's roughly 3 to 4 years. This creates a lot of inefficiencies. For instance, higher research and development costs, marketing costs, quality risks increase because they are not able to work so fast and to produce new models that will have a good quality. And it requires maintaining extensive spare parts inventories, which is also problematic. But there's also overproduction and pathological consequences of it. So now China has more domestic brands producing more cars that not only Chinese, but the global market can absorb. In fact, they have roughly 129 brands of electric vehicles, and probably only 15 of them could be profitable by 2013. The rest is not profitable, and it's not the situation that there is any possibility for them to be profitable in future. Then there is a problem now with selling these cars. You can buy a car with 60% of reduction in price in China, not covering the costs, of course. I will skip telling you or talking about the another elements here, but it will end. We are absolutely sure that this will have to end. It cannot be financed through the infinity. And there is, of course, overinvestment. They do not need the capacity of roughly 55 million units, which is now the case. So probably these factories are just redundant. So apparently there is a claim that markets started a counterattack to Chinese industrial policy and is saying, check, I'm checking you. And we'll see what will come. Probably, of course, we will have some global players still in the market. They will be able to have MG and some other BYD and some other brands in the market, but the rest will go out. So, conclusions. I'm sorry, I know that I'm talking a little bit too long, but when we look, what lessons can we have from this type of policy? So first, well, a sensible, prudent, and market-oriented or proportional industrial policy is just more effective. The same effect could be obtained with probably 20 or 30% money invested by China. EU state aid rules promote efficiency and proportionality. Of course, we can change them, we can make them more flexible, we can, for sure, and we must, protect European car makers against subsidy or industrial policy of China for some time at least. But in fact, I think that when we apply state aid rules correctly and effectively, this can be not a disadvantage for the European Union, but rather a benefit for its industrial policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. So Chinese example and PM Pavlak's joyful misunderstanding may lead to a hot discussion on state aid today, I believe. We round out to electric vehicle charging stations, legal regulations, and EU practices. Professor Erdem, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, so please free to start. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm now trying to share my screen for the presentation. I guess you could see right now. Yep. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, dear chair, again. Unfortunately, I'm also not available to provide my cam as well due to specific reasons. Nevertheless, I can share the screen for whom might want to follow in a virtual way. Hope that works. All right, then. So I'm very glad to have the chance to share some thoughts with you today. The topic I will be speaking about comes directly from a chapter I've contributed to the upcoming edited volume titled Regulatory Challenges for a Just Energy Transition. And I will try to explain very briefly as a last speaker for a better time management. So let me start then. When we speak about green transition, electric vehicles often symbolize hope, quiet streets, clean air, and modern technology. But there is a practical truth behind that optimism. An electric vehicle is not as useful as the charger that powers it. Charging infrastructure, in many ways, the bloodstream of sustainable transport. It's where law, economics, engineering, and consumer rights converge. Every time someone plugs in a vehicle, they are not just accessing electricity, they are entering a legal environment shaped by competition law, data protection, energy regulation, and maybe environmental policy. And the European Union, recognizing this, has spent the past decade developing a multi-layered legal architecture that ensures electric vehicles charging networks are not only built, but also fair, transparent, and interoperable. And this story begins in 2014 with the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Directive, better known as AFID. It was Europe's first attempt to coordinate national efforts, asking member states to set up policy frameworks for alternative fuels and charging infrastructure. And it laid down the vision, but like many directives, it left too much discretion and progress turned out uneven. That's why a decade later, the EU introduced the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Regulation, or we can call it AFIR, which came into force in April 2024. Unlike AFID, this regulation doesn't just encourage, it obliges. It sets clear, binding targets, uniform technical standards, and a Europe-wide commitment to accessibility. Let me take a moment to walk you through its key dimensions, because these truly define how Europe is shaping the charging ecosystem of the future. First, AFIR guarantees physical availability. It requires member states to install fast charging points along major transport routes, the so-called TEN-T corridors, so that drivers can move freely across the continent. The rule of thumb is that on these corridors, you shouldn't drive more than an hour without finding a reliable fast charger. It's a legal translation of the idea that range anxiety should no longer be a barrier to clean mobility. Second, AFIR harmonizes technology. It standardizes connectors, the combined charging system too. The uniformity might sound technical. It is, in fact, one of the regulation's strongest consumer protections. Then there is the question of payment and transparency. AFIR explicitly bans closed networks that only work with proprietary apps or memberships. It insists that every public charger must allow ad hoc payments by card, by contactless method, or through simple digital means. The principle is clear. If you can buy a coffee without an account, you should be able to buy electricity without one too. And finally, AFIR introduces a culture of open data. Operators must publish in real time where their charges are, what they cost, and whether they are functioning or not. This information must be accessible through open interfaces, encouraging innovation in navigation systems, mobile apps, and data-driven mobility services. When you look at these elements together, you see how AFIR is not just an infrastructure policy, it's a rights-based framework for how energy, technology, and consumers impact. Of course, AFIR doesn't stand alone. It fits into a wider legal mosaic. The Electricity Market Directive, we can say AMD or EMD, integrates charging into broader energy market. It guarantees that operators can access the grid on fair and non-discriminatory terms. So we can call it in competition law friend. The Connecting Europe facility, CEF, on the other hand, provides the financial muscle. Through CEF funding, the EU co-finances up to 70% of installation costs, particularly in less developed or rural regions. And it ensures that charging networks grow not only in capital cities, but also in remote areas. And then we have RED II, the Renewable Energy Directive, which ensures that the electricity powering these stations increasingly comes from renewable sources, because it's not enough for cars to be electric. The electricity itself must be clean. Together, these instruments form a legal ecosystem that's technically coherent, economically incentivized, and environmentally aligned. From a legal scholar's perspective, the practical questions might be what kind of service is charging station, or who licenses it, or what duties do operators owe to consumers. So for answering those questions under AFIR, stations are categorized by access type, public or private, and by power output. Public stations must provide non-discriminatory access to all users, while private ones, such as those in homes or workplaces, are regulated more lightly. This classification determines rights and obligations. For example, public operators must display transparent prices and offer open payment options, and private users like fleet owners may be exempt from the duties but lose access to public funding mechanisms. And in terms of licensing and authorization, licensing remains a national competence. Each member state defines its process, sometimes involving municipal construction permits, environmental approvals, and grid connection agreements. However, the trend across Europe is toward simplification. Some countries now use digital one-stop portals where operators can complete every step online. This is a positive direction, especially as the EU plans to digitalize administrative procedures across energy sectors. And in terms of obligations of service providers, perhaps the most demanding part for operators lies in ongoing compliance. AFIR requires transparency in pricing and reliability in service. It also links directly to the GDPR, ensuring that when a consumer location or payment data are processed, their privacy must be protected under GDPR. And beyond data privacy, there is the rising issue of cybersecurity as well. According to European Union Agency for Cybersecurity, about 15% of cyber incidents in the energy sector already involve IoT-based devices, including electronic vehicle chargers. And naturally, when millions of drivers interact daily with this infrastructure, disputes are inevitable. Billing errors, non-functioning chargers, unclear pricing, or unfair contract terms that can be listed. European law addresses this in two complementary ways. First, AFIR ensures clarity and fairness, so cost must be shown per kilowatt hour. All additional fees must be visible, and users must be able to pay without any pre-contract. Second, the Consumer Rights Directive gives broader protections, such as withdrawal rights, compensation for defective services, and remedies in case of misleading information. And if conflicts still arise, there is an established hierarchy for addressing those mechanisms, like local consumer protection agencies, alternative dispute resolution bodies, or EU's online dispute resolution platform could work. Stepping back, it's fascinating to see how different legal systems approach the same challenge. In the United States, the focus is on massive investment through the NEVI program, $5 billion for 500,000 chargers, but the legal rules differ state by state. And consumer protection is largely local, and interoperability remains patchy. In China, the system is more centralized. The State Grid Corporation oversees the rollout. And meanwhile, Japan relies on its own technical ecosystem. And India, as far as I checked, through its FAME2 program, is rapidly catching up with corridor-based networks. But law, never static, especially in a field driven by innovation. And we are now seeing the rise of wireless charging technologies, both stationary in motion. And these systems challenge the assumptions built into current law, which is designed for fixed wired charges. Issues like electromagnetic safety, metering accuracy, and cross-compatibility will all require fresh regulation. And then there is a data dimension. As vehicles become autonomous and charging fully automated, huge volumes of real-time data will flow between vehicles, grids, and charging points. So we also should focus on the GDPR. And let me close with a simple observation. Infrastructure is not about steel, cables, and software. It's about trust between providers and consumers. And the EU's approach to AFIR, the Electricity Market Directive, the CEF, or the RED II, all of those shows that we can build network that is reliable, not only technically, but also legally and ethically. And if we ensure that every driver can charge easily, pay transparently, and trust that their data is safe, then electricity might be sustainable. So the provision of electricity must be sustainable, but truly human-centered. So as Europe continues this journey, the challenge is no longer whether we can build enough charges. It's whether we can keep building trust every connection point between technology, market, and law. So thank you very much for your attention, and please forgive me if I look a little sleep deprived today. I wish all of you a great and productive conference. It's always nice to touch other scholars in person. I wish next year we could be together again. Have a great rest of your sessions and a dinner in advance. Thank you, dear Chair. Sorry for the inconvenience about sharing my slides, but I can provide if anyone interested.
Thank you very much, Professor, and I would like to start to open up the discussion at this moment. So just waiting for your questions or comments to our speakers.
So I have a question for you, Professor. I'm sorry, forgive me, but I won't try to pronounce your name. So, to, uh, I can't. I'm sorry. What do you think about European car brands that basically try to circumvent the market, importing Chinese? Cars under their name, but they are basically Chinese car with another name. And for example, in Italy, we have the DR brand, which imports Chinese cars, and they are doing pretty well in sellings, demonstrating that maybe they are cheaper and valuable option rather than European cars. And second, what do you think about the fact that Chinese companies are starting to buy European car brands? For example, Volvo now is owned by Chinese company, so maybe they have a lot of issues. I'm talking about the Chinese, but they are overtaking also the European market. So is it too late to do something? Thank you.
Can I answer now, or should we wait for other questions? Well, whatever you suggest.
Well, I think that you can answer the
Okay.
question and then we can
So I will start from the last one. As you probably know, the European Union imposed tariffs and certain countervailing measures on Chinese cars, but at the same time we cannot prevent a situation in which Chinese manufacturers are trying to produce cars in Europe or take over brands. But I still have in my mind words of a very unfamous person who was Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, who said once that capitalists will sell us ropes with which we will hang them. For many years, our policy towards Chinese producers was rather naive. In fact, if you look, I didn't share with you this story, the whole story, but before 2007, the policy was rather to cooperate with European producers or American or Korean, Japanese, and so forth and so on, create joint ventures because they were not able to sell cars in China otherwise. So it was conditional to sell cars in China to create a joint venture with Chinese partner. But it served rather as a platform to share technical innovations, for certain industrial espionage, maybe to a certain extent. So not the best idea. And now, because we are still, the China is of course still there, but we are in WTO, it's not possible for us to totally close our market. So now it's probably a little bit too late, as you said. What about, first question, if you could remind me, the first one?
That European brands import Chinese cars and rename that under their names.
Oh, this is something I was not that much aware of, I must say, because I understand that there are certain European brands like Volvo or MG. MG is in fact a British brand that was taken over by Chinese, but I didn't realize that we have this situation. But I think we cannot prevent it. But from the other point of view, I didn't mention it as well, that I think that this situation resembles to a certain extent the situation in the US in the 1970s, when Japanese players entered the market. And Japanese players at the time were very, very effective. And what was the effect of this? That American producers started to fight. So I think that to a certain extent, this can have, of course, there is a negative impact, but from the other point of view, Chinese expansion is something that is an incentive for European producers to be more effective, more innovative, but of course, at the same time, we must help them to survive. So I don't think we can prevent it at all.
Thank you. Really, really excellent presentations, and I thoroughly enjoyed all. I think my first question is in relation to the Namibia case, which to a very large extent has led to a lot of the issues around the green energy colonialism. And it's not the first. It's basically history repeating itself. We've seen it in diverse ways. But then the question is, to what extent can, national governments of those countries take some responsibilities, and what could they do to prevent that sort of interaction? And I think the second question is in relation to green bonds, and it's really about how can we, we say a lot about the transition, and we see the disconnections between green financing, particularly between the global south and the global north. My question is, to what extent can we accelerate the adoption of green bonds, particularly for developing or global south countries? And then my last question is to Prof, is that, China has been radical, right? China has been radical. And we need that level of radicalness or radicality to get anywhere. And there's a lot of pros and good things we can take away from China. But again, from your presentation, we do see a lot of these drawbacks. My question is, where is the sweet spot? Between being radical on one hand, and I advocate for being radical, but again, we're seeing this downside, and we see it with a lot of cities in China that have been built even are totally empty. So where is the sweet spot? Thank you.
Okay. Shall I start? No, you can start. Okay. So thank you very much for your question. I would say that probably is the $1 million question, and in that sense, I think for sure there is not only one specific answer, because the answers also depends to the context. I would say that for sure, one first point is that the states from Global South have to do their best to not accept anymore this kind of, for example, agreements. And you see, for example, some states, in particular in South America, that are starting withdrawing from BIT and international investment agreements exactly for that reason. And this is the first point. So if you want to change the system and you are a state, the first point is that you have the power to do that. And the second, I think, but this is probably more connected also with radical problem like corruption, like the social environment. You need to canalize this kind of investment, because the idea, for example, of green hydrogen investment is also to increase the work in energy fields. But the problem is that if you have limits, for example, for local content requirement that we discussed a lot this morning, it's important that you, as a state, with your public authorities, verify the respect of this. Because if you have truly local content requirement, for example, this could be a first step. But the problem in Global South, as I think you also said this morning in Global South, is that local content requirement is very easy to circumnavigate them. So I think from a regulatory perspective, you need to change the system from the basis, and from a more concrete, effective perspective, you need to verify this enforcement. What is the role of Global North here? Of course, to help them to support this in a truly way, so in a truly just transition, not just, as I said, a Trojan horse. But thank you again for your question.
For my question, so I can say that 3 layers of that thing. I mean, I can suppose I can offer that 3 layers. For the first layer, taxonomy of the what is green or what is not, and then the second one is the certain regulatory frameworks for green bonds, and the third layer is that using public funds to de-risk the private sector. When we achieve these 3 layers, then we can help the developing countries in this context.
So, Professor, if you respond to this question, I think we don't need conference like that any longer.
Yeah, truly holy grail question. But I have some answer to this one. So first, I think that in this particular situation, we must think about defensive measures, because it can happen that they will not survive. If now you can, of course, we've got tariffs, but they are not effective when we have Chinese producers producing here in Europe, producing with Chinese spare parts that are very cheap because they are subsidized. That is why we still have to think about survival of this crown, this jewel in our crown, in European crown, I mean, automotive industry. But at the same time, defensive measures should be temporary, because probably in just 5 or 10 years, we will see the same situation. You mentioned the real property market in China. So probably there will be a very similar situation with automotive industry, with some global brands that will survive, of course, and they will be here for, I don't want to say forever, but for many years. But it's not enough. We should think about, in fact, be more aggressive in our industrial policy, and I agree, but rather not trying to substitute the market process when it works. Rather trying to identify the elements or areas in which market doesn't work. So first, in terms of automotive industry, safeguarding access to necessary resources. This is something we should do as the European Union. And I believe that under the EU law, it would be better to have these measures on the central level and distributed on the central level. That is how we can circumvene state aid rules and this problem of level playing field. It is something that could be distributed on a central level. And first, access to necessary resources. As we heard, 60% of these resources are controlled by China, but we have to think about this one, and support technological development. So rather not production as such, but the pillars, the background, the basis of this production. That's what I can say.
About China, Professor. So I'm originally from Brazil, but I'm based in Brunel University in London. And at the moment, we have a very heated discussion in Brazil because we just had opened a Chinese car factory in Brazil. And I want to know your opinion about that, because from the 90s and the 2000s, we have a lot of European car factories coming to Brazil. And as you may know, in South America, Brazil is the highest price for a car manufacturer. So what's your view on that? Because they have subsidies, of course, to have these opportunities to come to another country, and subsidies from the government, from the Chinese government in these agreements. How you think the Europeans should respond to that in terms of China going to these markets, the other markets, in the competition there? because you're talking about the domestic competition that you can impose taxes. But when you go out and when you go international, there's not much to do. So what's your opinion on that?
Another holy grail question or pink unicorn question. I really, what do I think? I think that we will be, it all depends on the profitability of this model, of this Chinese model of production abroad. Whether this is financed just by subsidies and it will not be profitable in 5 or 10 years, then it's a temporary issue. If it's not, and if it is, of course, we can think about certain temporary defensive measures here for our producers. But the subsidy race between the EU and China, in my opinion, has no sense because it's just counterproductive. But if it is profitable, I would suggest that our producers, European producers, to be just more competitive. Nothing less, nothing more.
So I think I need to close up the discussion and close up the panel. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for great lectures, and thank you very much for the attendance.